Jessica Thompson had always been the type of person who blended into the background. At 34, she lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, working as a data analyst for a mid-sized insurance company. Her days followed a precise routine: wake at 5:30 a.m., coffee and the morning news, a quick jog around the block, then 8 hours of spreadsheets and statistical models. Her colleagues at Pinnacle Insurance knew her as reliable, thorough, and forgettable. She kept her desk clean, ate lunch alone while reading, and politely declined after-work drinks. Her supervisor, Patricia Johnson, often praised her work in passing, but never seemed to truly see her as anything more than a cog in the machine. What nobody at work knew was that Jessica spent her weekends at the Rocky Mountain shooting range, a 40-minute drive into the mountains. She'd been shooting since she was 12, taught by her grandfather, a retired Marine who'd emphasized discipline, respect, and precision above all else. "Shooting isn't about power, sweetheart," he'd told her. "It's about control of yourself, your breathing, your mind." The range had become her sanctuary. The elderly owner, Harold Peterson, had watched her improve over the years, from a nervous beginner to someone who could consistently hit center mass at distances that impressed even the veteran shooters. But Jessica kept her skill level modest in casual conversation, never wanting to draw attention or intimidate others. Everything changed when Harold announced he was selling the range. The buyer was Derek Sullivan, a former police officer turned entrepreneur who'd made his fortune opening tactical training centers across the Southwest. Harold seemed genuinely excited about the sale, believing Derek would bring professional instruction and modern equipment to the aging facility. Derek arrived for his first visit on a busy Saturday afternoon, accompanied by 2 associates, and carrying himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to command. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalogue everything around him. Jessica noticed how his gaze lingered on the female shooters, his expression shifting from assessment to something that made her uncomfortable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harold announced to the dozen or so shooters present, "I'd like you to meet Derek Sullivan, your new range owner." Derek stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Thank you, Harold. I'm excited to transform this place into a premier training facility. We'll be implementing new safety protocols, updated equipment, and professional instruction that meets law enforcement standards." His eyes swept the room, pausing on Jessica and the 2 other women present. "Of course, we'll need to ensure all our members can handle these elevated standards. Not everyone is cut out for serious tactical training." The comment hung in the air, seemingly innocent, but carrying an undertone that made Jessica's stomach tighten. She glanced at the other women, Nancy Williams, a nurse who'd been shooting for 15 years, and Stephanie Davis, a young teacher who'd started coming to the range after a break-in at her apartment. Both looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Harold, oblivious to the tension, clapped Derek on the shoulder. "I'm sure everyone here will adapt just fine. This is a welcoming community." Derek nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see." The changes began immediately after the sale closed. Derek wasted no time implementing his vision for the Sullivan Tactical Training Center, complete with new signage, higher membership, fees, and a lengthy list of regulations that seemed designed to exclude rather than include. Jessica received the new member handbook in the mail on a Tuesday. The 20-page document outlined dress codes, mandatory safety courses, equipment requirements, and behavioral expectations that read more like military protocol than community guidelines. The section on appropriate conduct included a clause about maintaining respect for instructional authority that gave Derek broad discretion to remove members who questioned his methods. The first Saturday under new management, Jessica arrived to find the range transformed. The comfortable folding chairs where shooters used to chat between rounds had been replaced with metal benches. Signs everywhere proclaimed "Safety first" and "Follow all instructor commands." Most jarring was the new staffing. Derek had hired 3 young men as range safety officers, all with military backgrounds and attitudes to match. "Ma'am, I need to see your certification." One of them, a muscular man with a buzz cut who introduced himself as Brandon, announced as Jessica approached her usual shooting station. Certification? Jessica had been shooting here for over a decade and had never needed anything beyond Harold's basic safety orientation. New policy: all members must complete our Tactical Fundamentals course before using the range independently. It's a 4-hour session offered Saturdays at 8 a.m. for $150. Jessica felt her jaw tighten. "I've been shooting here for years without any safety issues." Brandon shrugged. "Rules are rules. Mr. Sullivan wants everyone up to standard." She noticed that several of the male regulars were already at their stations, shooting without apparent interference. When she pointed this out, Brandon's expression hardened. "Those gentlemen have prior military or law enforcement experience. They're grandfathered in." Jessica bit back her response and signed up for the next available course. As she left, she overheard Brandon joking with another staff member about weekend warriors who think they know what they're doing. The Tactical Fundamentals course was humiliating. Derek personally conducted the session, treating the 5 participants: Jessica, Nancy, Stephanie, and 2 middle-aged men who'd recently joined, like incompetent children. He demonstrated proper stance, grip, and breathing techniques that Jessica had mastered years ago, then criticized her form despite her obvious competence. "Miss Thompson, your grip is too loose," he announced in front of the group, positioning himself behind her to correct her hand placement. His touch lingered longer than necessary, his body too close to hers. Women often struggle with the physicality of proper shooting technique. Jessica endured the inappropriate contact and condescending commentary, focusing on the goal of getting through the course. But when Derek announced that Nancy's performance was concerning and that she'd need additional private lessons before being cleared for range use, Jessica's patience began to fray. "Her grouping was well within acceptable limits," Jessica said quietly. Derek turned to her with raised eyebrows. "I beg your pardon?" Nancy's shots were consistently within the 8 ring at 25 yards. "That's better than half the people I've seen here." The room fell silent. Derek's expression shifted from surprise to something darker. "Miss Thompson, I'm the certified instructor here. I determine what constitutes acceptable performance." Jessica nodded, realizing she'd made a mistake. "Of course, I apologize. But the damage was done. Derek had identified her as a potential problem." The harassment began subtly. Jessica would arrive at the range to find her reserved shooting station accidentally double-booked. Her targets would be moved farther back than she'd requested, or she'd be assigned to lanes with malfunctioning equipment. When she complained, the staff would apologize with obvious insincerity and suggest she might be more comfortable at a beginner-friendly facility. Derek seemed to appear whenever she was shooting, always with some criticism or unwanted advice. He'd interrupt her practice sessions to demonstrate proper techniques, using the corrections as opportunities for inappropriate physical contact. When she stiffened or pulled away, he'd make comments about her being tense or not receptive to instruction. The psychological pressure intensified when Derek implemented a new rule requiring all members to log their shots and scores for safety monitoring. Jessica's consistently excellent performance became a source of suspicion rather than recognition. "These numbers don't look right," Derek announced one Saturday, reviewing her score sheet in front of other members. "A lot of people exaggerate their accuracy. We might need to have you reshoot under supervision." Jessica felt her face burn with embarrassment. "Those scores are accurate." "I'm sure you think they are," Derek replied with a condescending smile. "But perception and reality are often different." Nancy and Stephanie had both stopped coming to the range, intimidated by the hostile environment. Jessica found herself increasingly isolated, the only woman who continued to push back against Derek's policies. She began documenting incidents in a notebook, recording dates, times, and witnesses to the harassment. The situation escalated when Derek announced that the range would be featured in a local television segment about tactical training facilities. He selected several members to demonstrate shooting techniques on camera, pointedly excluding Jessica, despite her superior skills. "This segment is about showcasing serious shooters," he explained, when she asked why she hadn't been chosen. "We need people who represent the professional standards we're establishing here." The selected group included several men whose shooting abilities were demonstrably inferior to Jessica's. The message was clear: competence mattered less than fitting Derek's vision of who belonged in his facility. The breaking point came when Jessica discovered that Derek had been telling other members she was unstable and obsessed with proving herself. The rumors spread through the tight-knit shooting community, damaging her reputation and relationships she'd built over years. "Maybe you should consider finding a hobby that's more suitable," Derek suggested during one particularly tense encounter. Not everyone is cut out for this level of training. Jessica realized that Derek wouldn't stop until he'd driven her away entirely. She was fighting a battle she couldn't win through normal channels unless she changed the rules of engagement. The final straw came during what Derek called Performance Evaluation Day. He'd instituted monthly assessments for all members, ostensibly to ensure everyone maintained proper safety standards. In reality, it was another tool for harassment and control. Jessica arrived to find Derek waiting with a clipboard and his 3 staff members. A small crowd of other members had gathered to watch the evaluations, creating an uncomfortable spectacle of what should have been private assessments. "Miss Thompson," Derek announced loudly, "you're up first. Let's see if all that practice has paid off." He'd set up a deliberately challenging course, 5 targets at varying distances with specific requirements for number of shots and time limits. Jessica recognized it as a test designed for failure, the kind of course that would give Derek justification to revoke her membership. As she prepared for the evaluation, Jessica overheard Derek talking to Brandon about her performance. "She's been coming here for years but never seems to improve. Some people just don't have the natural ability for precision shooting." The casual dismissal of her skills, spoken as if she were invisible, ignited something in Jessica. She'd spent months enduring his condescension, his inappropriate touching, his systematic attempts to undermine her confidence. She documented every incident, filed complaints that went nowhere, and tried to maintain her dignity while he chipped away at her spirit. "Actually," Jessica said, turning to face Derek, "I think there might be some confusion about my abilities." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I've been shooting recreationally for years, keeping my performance modest to avoid making others uncomfortable. But if you're going to evaluate me professionally, you should know what you're actually assessing." The crowd grew quiet. Derek's expression shifted from amusement to uncertainty. "Miss Thompson, I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm implying that your evaluation might not go the way you expect." Jessica had made a decision. She was tired of hiding, tired of being small, tired of letting Derek's toxicity poison something she loved. If he wanted to make a spectacle of her abilities, she'd give him exactly that. "Shall we begin?" she asked, stepping up to the shooting line. Derek recovered his composure, but Jessica noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he checked his stopwatch. 5 targets, 10 shots each, time limit of 2 minutes, standard tactical precision requirements. Jessica nodded. her earlier nervousness replaced by a calm that felt like coming home. She'd spent years perfecting her technique, hours upon hours of practice that Derek had dismissed as amateur enthusiasm. Now she would show him what genuine mastery looked like. The first target was closest, 25 yards. Rebecca's stance shifted subtly, her body finding the perfect balance between stability and flexibility. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steady and controlled. The noise of the crowd faded away until there was only the target, the weapon, and the precision her grandfather had taught her to cultivate. She fired. Perfect center shot. The second shot followed immediately, another perfect hit. The crowd murmured with surprise. Marcus's expression began to change as he realized this wasn't going to be the humiliation he'd planned. By the fifth target, Jessica had achieved something remarkable. 50 shots, all within the X-ring, completed in under 90 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at the targets, then at Jessica, then back at the targets. These scores are impossible for someone of your experience level. Jessica smiled for the first time in months. That's because you never bothered to learn what my actual experience level was. The perfect performance had shattered Derek's narrative, but Jessica knew it wasn't enough. Demonstrating her abilities had given her credibility, but it wouldn't address the systematic harassment she'd endured or protect other women from similar treatment. That evening, Jessica sat at her kitchen table with months of documented incidents spread before her. She'd recorded every inappropriate comment, every instance of unwanted physical contact, every example of discriminatory treatment. The pattern was clear and damning, but she needed more than her word against Derek's. She reached out to Nancy Williams, the nurse who'd stopped coming to the range after being told she needed private lessons to improve her adequate shooting skills. Nancy was initially reluctant to discuss her experiences. "I just wanted to practice my shooting in peace," Nancy said over coffee. "When that became impossible, I found another range. I don't want to cause trouble." Jessica understood the reluctance. Coming forward against someone in a position of authority was risky, especially when that person had spent months systematically undermining your credibility. "I'm not asking you to cause trouble," Jessica said gently. "I'm asking you to prevent it from happening to others." Nancy's expression shifted as she considered this perspective. "What exactly are you planning?" Jessica had spent considerable time researching Derek's background and business practices. His tactical training centers had faced complaints in other cities, patterns of discrimination, inappropriate conduct, and hostile environments that drove away female members. In 2 cases, facilities had quietly settled discrimination lawsuits. "I'm planning to file a formal complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Division," Jessica said, "but I need corroboration. Your experiences, Stephanie's experiences, documentation of the pattern." Nancy nodded slowly. Stephanie might be willing to talk. She was pretty upset about how she was treated. Jessica also reached out to Harold Peterson, the former owner. Harold had maintained friendly relationships with many long-time members and was disturbed to learn about the culture Derek had created. "This isn't what I wanted when I sold the range," Harold said, shaking his head. "I thought he'd bring professionalism, not this." Harold provided crucial information about Derek's business practices and contractual obligations. The sale agreement included clauses about maintaining the range's welcoming community atmosphere and preventing discrimination against members. Derek's behavior potentially violated these terms. The breakthrough came when Jessica discovered that Derek's staff had been sharing videos of her shooting sessions in private group chats, mocking her technique and making inappropriate comments about her appearance. Brandon, the range safety officer, who'd initially challenged her credentials, had been careless with his phone security. A mutual friend who worked in IT helped Jessica access the deleted messages and videos. The content was devastating. Months of documented harassment, including explicit discussions about how to make female members uncomfortable enough to leave. This is sexual harassment, hostile work environment, and potentially criminal, Jessica's attorney explained when she brought him the evidence. The question is whether you want to pursue civil action, criminal charges, or both. Jessica had spent weeks considering her options. She could file a lawsuit seeking monetary damages and a court order to change Derek's practices. She could report the criminal behavior to police. She could take her evidence to the media and destroy his reputation publicly. "I want to do this right," she told her attorney. "I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Jessica's formal complaint to the Colorado Civil Rights Division triggered an investigation that Derek clearly hadn't anticipated. Within days of filing, Jessica received a hostile phone call from Derek demanding she withdraw her baseless accusations and threatening legal action for defamation. "You're making a serious mistake," Derek said, his voice tight with anger. "I have lawyers who specialize in dealing with disgruntled customers who make false claims." Jessica remained calm. "I'm sure your lawyers will be interested in the evidence I've compiled." The investigation moved quickly. Civil rights officials interviewed Nancy, Stephanie, and several other former female members who came forward once they learned about the complaint. Each woman's story followed a similar pattern: initial enthusiasm, gradual harassment, and eventual departure from the range. Derek's response was predictable but poorly executed. He attempted to discredit Jessica by sharing her concerning behavior with current members, describing her as obsessed with proving herself and potentially dangerous. This backfired when several members came forward to defend her, describing Derek's obvious bias and inappropriate conduct. The situation escalated when Jessica's attorney sent a formal letter to Derek's business, detailing the evidence of harassment and demanding immediate policy changes. The letter also noted that Jessica's perfect shooting performance had been recorded by multiple witnesses, contradicting months of Derek's claims about her incompetence. Derek's panic became evident when he suddenly instituted new policies that seemed designed specifically to exclude Jessica. He raised membership fees, implemented character requirements for continued membership, and announced that the range would be closed for renovations on the days Jessica typically practiced. For defamation, "You're making a serious mistake," Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. "I have lawyers who specialize in dealing with disgruntled customers who make false claims." Rebecca remained calm. "I'm sure your lawyers will be interested in the evidence I've compiled." The investigation moved quickly. Civil rights officials interviewed Linda, Amy, and several other former female members who came forward once they learned about the complaint. Each woman's story followed a similar pattern: initial enthusiasm, gradual harassment, and eventual departure from the range. Marcus's response was predictable but poorly executed. He attempted to discredit Rebecca by sharing her concerning behavior with current members, describing her as obsessed with proving herself and potentially dangerous. This backfired when several members came forward to defend her, describing Marcus's obvious bias and inappropriate conduct. The situation escalated when Rebecca's attorney sent a formal letter to Marcus's business, detailing the evidence of harassment and demanding immediate policy changes. The letter also noted that Rebecca's perfect shooting performance had been recorded by multiple witnesses, contradicting months of Marcus's claims about her incompetence. Marcus's panic became evident when he suddenly instituted new policies that seemed designed specifically to exclude Rebecca. He raised membership fees, implemented character requirements for continued membership, and announced that the range would be closed for renovations on the days Rebecca typically practiced. These obviously retaliatory measures only strengthened Jessica's case. The civil rights investigators noted the timing and targeted nature of the policy changes, adding retaliation to their list of violations. The media attention began when a local reporter picked up the story. The headline, "Local Woman Fights Discrimination at Shooting Range," attracted significant attention, particularly after Jessica's attorney released the video evidence of her perfect performance contrasted with Derek's recorded comments about her abilities. The shooting community's response was swift and decisive. Several prominent instructors and competitive shooters came forward to support Jessica, describing Derek's behavior as antithetical to the values of responsible gun ownership and training. Derek's business began to suffer as members cancelled their memberships and potential new customers chose other facilities. The tactical training courses that had been his primary revenue source were consistently under-enrolled, and his reputation in the industry began to crumble. The final blow came when Jessica's attorney discovered that Derek had been operating without proper business insurance for discrimination claims. His insurance company had dropped coverage months earlier after learning about the pattern of complaints at his other facilities. Facing mounting legal costs, declining revenue, and an investigation that was uncovering more violations daily, Derek made the decision that would seal his fate. He attempted to force Jessica off the range property through physical intimidation. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning when Jessica arrived for her regular practice session. Derek was waiting in the parking lot with Brandon and another staff member, their body language aggressive and confrontational. "You're no longer welcome here," Derek announced as Jessica approached the entrance. "Your membership has been terminated for violating our community standards." Jessica had expected this moment and was prepared. "Which specific standards have I violated?" "Disruptive behavior, failure to respect instructional authority, and creating a hostile environment for other members." The accusations were laughably false, but Derek's tone was deadly serious. Jessica noticed that he'd positioned himself and his staff to block her access to the range entrance. "I'd like to see the written notice of termination, as required by your membership agreement," Jessica said, calmly. Derek's face flushed red. "I don't need to provide you with anything. This is private property, and you're trespassing." Jessica pulled out her phone and began recording. "I'm a paid member in good standing with no violations on record. You're terminating my membership without cause and attempting to bar me from property I have legal right to access." "Turn that off," Brandon demanded, stepping closer to Jessica. "You can't record us without permission." "Colorado is a one-party consent state," Jessica replied, continuing to record. "I can record any conversation I'm part of." The situation escalated when Derek grabbed for Jessica's phone, attempting to stop the recording. The physical contact was exactly what Jessica had hoped to avoid, but it also provided the clearest evidence yet of Derek's willingness to resort to intimidation. Jessica stepped back, keeping the phone recording. "You just committed assault. This entire interaction is being recorded." Other members had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Several longtime shooters who'd witnessed Jessica's perfect performance stood nearby, their expressions supportive. Harold Peterson had also arrived, having heard about the planned confrontation. "Derek, this isn't right," Harold said, stepping forward. "Jessica has every right to be here." Derek turned on Harold with unexpected venom. "You don't have any say in this anymore, old man. This is my range now." The disrespect toward Harold, a beloved figure in the local shooting community, turned the crowd decisively against Derek. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the gathered members. Jessica seized the moment. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about what's been happening at this range." She played several audio recordings on her phone, Derek making inappropriate comments about female members, discussing strategies to make women uncomfortable enough to leave, and dismissing safety concerns raised by female shooters. The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile. These were people who took shooting sports seriously, who valued safety and respect above all else. Derek's recorded comments revealed him as someone who violated every principle they held dear. "This is taken out of context," Derek protested, but his denials fell flat against the clear evidence of his voice making discriminatory statements. Jessica continued with video evidence of her perfect shooting performance, contrasted with Derek's contemporaneous comments about her lack of natural ability and concerning performance. "For months, this man has been telling you that I'm incompetent, dangerous, and unfit to be here," Jessica said, addressing the crowd. "The evidence shows the opposite is true. The question is, what else has he been lying about?" The confrontation reached its climax when Derek, realizing his position was untenable, made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. "Everyone needs to leave," he announced. "The range is closed until further notice." Harold stepped forward again. "You can't close the range arbitrarily. The sale agreement includes provisions for maintaining normal operations." "Sue me," Derek snapped. Jessica smiled. "I already am." The aftermath unfolded with surprising speed. The video of Marcus's confrontation with Rebecca went viral in the shooting community, shared across forums and social media platforms. The footage clearly showed Marcus attempting to physically intimidate a member, grabbing for her phone, and making threats. Within a week, the Colorado Civil Rights Division had concluded their investigation, finding probable cause for discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. The state attorney general's office announced they were considering criminal charges for assault and intimidation. Marcus's business collapsed almost immediately. His remaining members cancelled their memberships en masse, unwilling to associate with someone who'd been exposed as a discriminatory bully. His tactical training courses were cancelled when no one enrolled. His staff, including Tyler, quit. Rather than face continued association with the scandal, the civil lawsuit Rebecca filed was settled within a month. Marcus agreed to pay substantial damages, sell the range back to Frank Kozlowski at a loss, and accept a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting Rebecca or any of the other women who'd come forward. Frank reopened the range, under its original name, implementing new policies that explicitly prohibited discrimination and harassment. He invited Rebecca to serve on the range's advisory board, recognizing her as both a skilled shooter and an advocate for inclusive shooting sports. The most satisfying outcome came 6 months later when Rebecca received an invitation to compete in the Colorado State Precision Shooting Championship. Her perfect performance at the range had attracted attention from competitive shooting organizations who'd investigated her background and discovered her impressive but previously unrecorded achievements. Rebecca hesitated at first. Competition shooting would mean public attention, scrutiny, and pressure she'd spent years avoiding. But she realized that hiding her abilities had never protected her from harassment. It had only enabled it. She accepted the invitation. The championship was held at a range outside Denver, with competitors from across the region. Rebecca's entry had generated significant media attention, given the circumstances that had brought her back to competitive shooting. As she prepared for her first event, Rebecca felt the familiar calm that had served her well during the confrontation with Marcus. She wasn't shooting for revenge or to prove a point. She was shooting because she loved the precision, the control, the perfect harmony between mind and body that her grandfather had taught her to cultivate. Her performance was flawless. 5 events, 5 first-place finishes, including a new state record in precision rifle shooting. The crowd's reaction was thunderous, but Rebecca's satisfaction came from the technical excellence of her shots, not the acclaim. During the awards ceremony, Rebecca was asked to address the crowd. She spoke briefly about the importance of inclusive shooting sports and the need to judge people by their abilities rather than their gender or appearance. "Shooting is about precision," she concluded, holding up her gold medal. "The only thing that matters is where your shots land." In the audience, she spotted several young women who'd started coming to the range after Marcus's departure. They were learning to shoot in an environment free from harassment and discrimination, developing skills without having to navigate the toxic culture that had nearly driven Rebecca away. After the ceremony, Rebecca was approached by a representative from the US Olympic shooting team. They'd been monitoring her performance and were interested in discussing her potential for international competition. Rebecca smiled, considering the offer. A year ago, she'd been hiding her abilities, enduring harassment, and wondering if she should abandon shooting altogether. Now she was being recruited for the Olympics. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "But I'm definitely interested." As she drove home that evening, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd started as a victim of harassment, someone who felt powerless against an abusive authority figure. She'd ended as a champion, someone who'd not only overcome that abuse but had helped create a better environment for others. The phone calls and messages continued for days. Other women from Marcus's former facilities reached out to thank her for speaking up. Shooting instructors asked for her advice on creating inclusive training programs. Media outlets wanted to tell her story. Rebecca accepted some interviews but declined others, recognizing that her story was just one example of a broader problem in many male-dominated sports and activities. The real victory wasn't her personal vindication. It was the cultural change her actions had helped create. Marcus had disappeared from the shooting world entirely, his reputation destroyed, and his business model exposed as unsustainable. Rebecca occasionally wondered what had become of him, but found that she no longer cared. He'd been an obstacle to overcome, not a nemesis to defeat. The true measure of her success came from the women who now felt welcome at the range, the policies that protected future members from discrimination, and the recognition that excellence could come from unexpected sources. Rebecca had aimed for justice and hit the target perfectly. Sometimes that's the only shot that matters.